Welcome to episode 71 of the How to Japanese podcast. I'm Daniel Morales from howtojapanese.com, and it's December 2025. We made it. Otsukare-sama deshita. This month is a bit of a special episode. I'm actually going to be taking the month off, so I'm mailing it in a little bit. I introduced the reason why in the newsletter, so go read that for a little bit more context. But to say it specifically, my wife and I are expecting this month, so I'm trying to take it easy on myself. I'm actually recording this back in November, but did want to put out some kind of content. So I've been putting out the newsletter monthly for 5 years, and then the blog nearly monthly for 17 years. So I'm taking a break this time. I'll share what amounts to a clip show, not with the podcast, but for the newsletter. I went through what I think are some of my best posts over the years, some of my best writing, and I shared some details about those on the newsletter, and I'll do the same here. Without any of the scripting that I usually do for my episodes that I think make them a little bit more clean and less off the cuff and less ums and ahs and things like that. Fewer mistakes. I do have a small recommendation at the end, so stay tuned for that. So the first piece of writing that I shared in the newsletter is a link to a 2009 blog post where I wrote about reading strategies, skimming, and kanji compounds. And the key here is that the kanji compounds come in different categories, different structures. And so I go over what those specifically are. And the reason why those are helpful is because when you're reading, you need to move at some point from reading and looking up every word in whatever you're reading to kind of getting the overall context, skimming, reading for volume. And in order to do that, knowing the structure of kanji compounds so that you can kind of like make a best guess at what a word is doing so you don't have to go look it up, is a critical skill. And so I do that with the word ikukyu, which is the title of this podcast and newsletter. Ikukyu being paternity leave or maternity leave, parental leave. In this case is in the structure adjective plus noun, where the first kanji, I say adjective, but it's really modifier plus noun, where the first kanji is modifying the second kanji, just describing it in further detail. In this case, vacation, yasumu, is described by iku sodateru, the word for raising. So vacation for raising, in this case, children. So ikukyu, that's how that compound works. That's the first one I introduced, and I think that's a nice post that still holds up, that I should probably turn into newsletter content at some point. The second post that I shared was the one where I learned how to make natto during the pandemic. During the pandemic, I tried sour bread, but my oven sucked in Chicago. It did not get hot enough to really make good bread. And so I learned how to make natto. I saw somebody, I can't remember who, post that you could find natto spores in America. I think on Amazon. I think I got mine on Amazon. And I can't remember who that was, to be honest. I'm sure it was somebody that I should probably shout out. So if you think it was you, if you found the spores, let me know, and I'll shout you out in the next episode. But I got the spores, and I knew how to do like food fermentation because I had been making yogurt in my Instant Pot. And so I kind of used those basic procedures to figure out how to make natto. The hardest part is really getting the spores, and then after that, all you need is something that will hold a warm temperature, essentially, for about 24 hours. I use an Instant Pot, which is super, super useful for lots and lots of different reasons. I use it pretty frequently. And the one thing I would fix about that article is that I did not include the correct time to steam the soybeans. You need a lot more time than I recommend. I think you probably need over an hour, or maybe even an hour and a half, 2 hours, if you're just going to steam them. If you're cooking the beans like in liquid, which will make them like much, much softer, then you need less time. But I think steaming them is kind of key to getting that soft yet still firm texture that they have in Japan. So let me know if you have any strategies about that. I mean, I'm not using it anymore. I would be uh, not a fool, but it would be an interesting use of time if I was making natto while living in Japan, just because of um, how ubiquitous it is and how cheap it is. My time is better spent elsewhere. So another article I shared was the feature I wrote about Japanese craft beer for the Japan Times back in 2016. I mentioned this in the last episode when I talked about Aoki-san from Popeye. And as I mentioned there, a lot of what I wrote still holds up. I could probably put together like a follow-up article about this at this point, um, about like what has changed in the last 10 years, but not too much has. We've seen the tax rates for beer slowly be equalized with um, the tax rates for happoshu and daisan biru. So I'd have to look closely, but maybe some of the daisan biru, this third type beer that uses alternative sugars to ferment, maybe some of those have died off slowly, but you still see kinmugi everywhere. I do feel like the beer prices have gone down relative to happoshu prices and things like that. So where Japan used to feel like a can of beer was expensive, it's now feeling quite affordable given the inflation in other countries, especially America. And the quality of the macro brew in Japan is quite good. So that's one thing I think that's really um, kind of been beneficial to the Japanese beer industry. I think they're still fighting for market share. Uh, you see the growth of the highball after 2012. I wrote, that's another newsletter that I'd recommend reading. It's the one I wrote about kakuhai and the impact that kakuhai had um, on the highball market, and then now what just seeing like canned highballs and things like that in stores, but also the growth of like chuhai as a major category. Chuhai's been around forever, obviously, but as a major player in terms of shelf space, and then even like low ABV chuhais and things like that. That's been interesting. Beer itself, on the other hand, you've seen like gradual expansion of different flavor profiles and things like that. You've seen the premium malts really having a lot of staying power on the shelf, and then all the variations on premium malts. Suntory doing things like Master's Dream, although the Master's Dream I saw on the shelf at the supermarket this weekend was from April, which was super depressing. Never always check your dates in Japan. If you're not checking your dates, you may be drinking old beer. We're really lucky in Japan. You can drink, it's November 24th as I'm speaking, and I had a super dry this weekend that was packaged in November, which means it was packaged within the last 3 weeks, potentially even sooner. And that's, I think, a really good sign. Fresh is a flavor when it comes to beer, and you want to be drinking fresh beer. If you're a Murakami fan, you could always check out some of my writing on Murakami. I have reviews for basically all of his novels from 1Q84 onward. I review them in Japanese before really the English translation comes out for sure, and before many other English publications can review them. Specifically, you might look at my Hardboiled Wonderland project, where I did a close reading of Hardboiled Wonderland and The End of the World. I compared the two Japanese editions. Yes, there are two, the original paperback version, and then the complete works edition that Murakami made some very kind of interesting edits to, although they amount to essentially superficial edits, I would say, and they're very strange. He takes out some really nice sections. So I have I think 40 posts on that at least. I think there are a couple of chapters that did more than one post, so it's probably more than 40. And I am slowly adding Rubin's new translations to the passages that I looked at. And so hopefully I'll be able to write or podcast about it at some point. I've been meaning to for a long time, but I still haven't had time for it. Another Murakami project that you'd probably want to take a look at to understand the origin of How to Japanese is my 2009 live blog of 1Q84. That was probably the most attention I ever got on the blog, and I think helped build some of my readership. Part of that was thanks to a few key links shared by, at that time, I think it was called Meta no Tame. It was the Neo-Japanism blog that W. David Marks and Matt Treva were running, and they shared that link, and a number of people found it. So I was like live blogging, and people were commenting. It was a lot of fun. I took a day off work so I could read the Murakami novel. That was cool. That was a good time. I also do an annual Murakami Fest, which in September, once a week, I will put out a blog post about something that hasn't been translated into English by Murakami, just a little passage, and like analyze it. It's overlapped in places with the Harbor Wonderland project, and also my reading of his memoir, Distant Drums, which is about his time traveling in Europe. That's kind of currently what I'm going through. So every year I'll do like 4 or 5 posts on that, depending on how many weeks there are in the month. And then true completionists, true how-to-Japanese completionists can try to read the 70 plus articles I wrote for the Japan Times bilingual page. I would point you to my articles about emails and letters that seem to have gotten particularly good reviews. And in my newsletter, I share a link to my portfolio, which has links to all the articles. I think one in particular, in the newsletter, I share a link to a blog post where I had I think 2 weeks in a row that I wrote for the Japan Times, or at least 2 that month, and I was sharing that on the blog. And so those 2 articles happened to be really good ones, I thought. One, I wrote about how to learn political vocabulary, which I think gets at something fundamental about learning a language, something like abstract about how language is not the written language and how you go about learning it divorced from the written language. I also linked to an article on keigo and pronouns, about how essentially the pronouns are wrapped up in keigo verbs, and so that's another benefit of mastering some keigo verbs, so that you don't have to say anata or watashi even. You can just say the verb, and it's all the context is wrapped up in those. So check that out. The Japan Times has also allowed me to kind of connect with some really cool people. I wrote for their Why Did You Leave Japan column, and I interviewed, I think, probably like 4, 5, 6 people, and one of those was a legendary I should say, a legendary Japanese blues funk guitarist named Yamagishi Jun, whose music I've been listening to since the early 2000s. He is a really incredible guy. Moved to New Orleans at some point, doesn't own a car in New Orleans, a city without really any public transportation to speak of. Obviously, we have the streetcar, but that, if you're commuting on the streetcar, it's not very reliable. He was the guitarist in a band called Papa Gross Funk that played at the Maple Leaf Bar every Monday night and drew a crowd every Monday night for years and years and years. And I learned about them indirectly from my 6th grade science teacher, who I think was the bouncer at that bar for a little while. Papa Gross Funk unfortunately has disbanded. You can find their music everywhere. It's excellent, really just solid stuff, directly like in the Meters lineage of New Orleans funk. Really classic stuff. Just always something that's fun to listen to. Yamagishi is still playing with tons and tons of different bands. He's played with like the Mardi Gras Indians. He's played with everyone in New Orleans, and always worth checking out what he's up to. If you go to New Orleans, you got to go see Yamagishi play. He's excellent. So I interviewed him in 2017. Give that a read. And then if you are already a podcast listener and newsletter subscriber, I hope that you've caught my other newsletters. I link to like 3 that I thought were particularly interesting. One, I talk about the phrase itoshi and what it means, what kind of assumptions are wrapped up in that phrase. Itoshi, good year, good age. Kakuhai, which I mentioned earlier, is a highball made from Sundry Kaku whiskey, and I break down the effect that had on the beverages market a little bit. That's an interesting one. And then I also wrote about a concept I call impossible pairs last September or in 2024, September 2024. And so I've been going through some of these impossible pairs in the last year. These are things like Tashka and Tashka ni, the difference between those two. What are some other ones? Oh, I can't remember any of my impossible pairs right now. Kisu and Gusu, the even and odd. That's a really good one. That's a hard one to to get until you get it, which I think, and the strategy for getting it is a lot like the strategy I mentioned in that Japan Times article about learning political vocabulary, which is that you have to start wrapping up meaning with sound of different sounds. And so the kisu is kimyo, same as kimyo, and gu is haigusha, the word in partner, which is pair. So gu would be even, kisu strange, odd, kimyo strange, kisu odd. That's a nice little mnemonic you can get there. And I guess the first one that I talk about is yoka versus yoka. That finally, literally in the last year, after studying Japanese for over 20 years, finally know the difference between the 4th and the 8th of the month. That's a tough one. I write about that in the initial Impossible Pairs article. So give that a read. And then last but not least, I will share. I share my writing about the 50 best-selling Inca songs. So I wrote a Japan Times article about Inca in 2017, and alongside that on my blog, I found this list that's online that kind of floats around about the 50 best-selling Inca songs of all time. I don't think it's been updated in like years and years and years and years, because I think you'd have like a bunch of different singers on there that are not on the list. And then I counted them down 10 at a time over the course of a week, I think. It really took me a long time. I remember I was writing that like at lunch when I was working at the Japanese consulate in Chicago. I would bring my laptop in at lunch. That was the first time I had a laptop where it was finally felt portable. It didn't feel like huge like machine that was super heavy like all my previous laptops. So I could bring it to the office, and then at lunch I would go downstairs to the break area and then just write. And so I remember doing that there. And so I have links to YouTube videos for all 50 of these Inca songs. Not all of them are still working links, but I do have permalink links to YouTube searches where you can find some of these songs. And I analyze the lyrics a little bit and look into it. It's pretty interesting. I think even if it's not like the most updated best-selling Inca songs, I think it still is very, very telling in terms of like Inca as a genre, and interesting from a language learning perspective and a cultural perspective. And yes, Inca is something I would, if I had all the time in the world, I would want to maybe spend a little bit more time writing about. But my interest has waned a little bit in Inca. I don't know. Maybe I just got sick of it a little bit. It's definitely an acquired taste, I would say, for the most part. But it's very interesting. A lot of it's overdone. Maybe that's it. Maybe I'm just tired of things that are overdone. So, and that's it. Those are all the links that I shared. If you like blogs with long backlogs, then How to Japanese would be the place for you. So go and dig through all my stuff. And as always, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to howtojapanese@gmail.com. I'm always glad to answer questions on the podcast or the newsletter. I think I can write about just about anything, and sometimes it's nice to have a little bit of topics provided by others, and I've got plenty of stuff that I'm looking right now at my list of future newsletter topics, and I can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 kind of viable ones. Of those, 2 are fully drafted. The third is like getting there, adding content to it. Fourth and fifth have like little seeds that I could probably knock out if I sat down for a couple hours and wrote them out. But always nice to have some fresh material. So please do feel free to reach out if there's anything like, oh, I need something. How do I say this? Or I'm this situation. What do I do here? Or I'm running into this wall with my studies. What can I do? Let me know. Yeah, and that would be the other thing that I would point you all to is the US JETA Japanese reading group that I run each month. We get together and just go over some kind of short passage for about an hour and a half, and go sentence by sentence to try and understand what the Japanese is doing. So try and find that. You're welcome to join. Also with US JETA, I've been volunteering some time to do Japanese coaching and helping people kind of like get their studies back on track. So take a look at that. We have a Discord community that I should probably put that in the newsletter as well. And I'll put that in the newsletter for anyone who wants to join the Discord and just ask questions about studying Japanese. And that's it. That's all I have for December. I'll take the rest of the month off and then be back in January. So hope you all have a great New Year. Actually, that reminds me. I'm glad I remembered. I forgot my recommendation. Almost forgot my recommendation. So, my recommendation is a bit general this month. And it's simply this. Come to Japan for New Year's sometime and don't do anything. Don't do anything. Just do the New Year's stuff. And by New Year's stuff, I mean eat, drink, watch TV, go in hot springs, visit temples, and be very quiet. Enjoy how quiet Japan gets around New Year's. I was trying to think about how this would be like logistically possible, but I guess it becomes easier if you have an Airbnb type situation rather than a hotel type situation, because then you have access to like a stove and a microwave and things like that, and maybe like more like of a lounge situation. But if you couldn't really host anyone in a hotel room as easily, but you can easily do a New Year's situation at a onsen. Like a couple years ago with my in-laws, we went to Tottori and to just an onsen there, and it was great. It was nice. Like they had like a big, hotel buffet for dinner and for breakfast, and then we just like went to our hotel room and like played board games and watched TV. The TV, if you don't know, is they have the red white song battle on NHK, which I think a lot of people have a love-hate relationship with. And then there's what else? The fights, if there are fights this year. There used to be the comedy shows. I think there probably still are some comedy shows. There just aren't the downtown ones. And it's just there's great supermarket food. Go to the grocery store. Go to grocery stores and just buy a platter of snacks, and then get some other food and just stock up your fridge so that you don't have to go out, because the grocery stores are all closed for like the first 3 days of the year. And take it easy. I mean, it's tough, I guess, if you don't have like a local community that you can tap into. But you can do it on your own if you want to. I think one good strategy would be to like arrive like on the 30th and just be terribly jet lagged, so that all you can do is like stumble out to a supermarket, pick up a bunch of food, stock up, and then just spend New Year's Eve and the first like in a jet lag haze, and by the time you're over the jet lag, the country is back up and running again. And so maybe that's a good way to experience Japan. But yep, that's all I got this month. I'll be back in January. I hope you all have a great New Year's, and we'll see you in 2026.